Welcome to another LinkedIn Live with I'm Paul Tevis from Helping Improve alongside my colleague Allison Pollard. We're
Mhm.
happy to be back with you for another month. And this month we're talking about the interesting and fascinating and often frustrating complexity that is being a technical manager
Mhm.
because of all of the different hats that you inevitably end up wearing and juggling and trying to make sense of all of that. How can you actually take all the seemingly disparate things that you need to do as a manager in a tech organization and do well with it and make them work in a way that is coherent and doesn't just frustrate you?
Right. I remember years ago working with a technical delivery manager, and he was so frustrated because he didn't get to spend enough time with his team. And I thought, well, like, what's pulling you away? If you're a people manager, that's your like main responsibility. What else could be going on that you don't get to spend the time with your people? And it was all those other responsibilities around budget and making sure deadlines and dependencies and what are the other transformations or initiatives happening across the organization? How is he helping to drive change forward? That he would be in so many meetings for these other things that he didn't get to spend the time with his folks. And so, yes, a delivery manager, it's not just like a career coach for a group of developers. There's
Right.
so much more that you're expected to be thinking about and supporting as you're a technical manager.
From my own experience of sitting in that seat, when we were going through a good bit of change from a process standpoint, we were adopting a lot of agile practices and methods. We were also undergoing pretty substantial change to our technical architecture and infrastructure. And so I was involved in all of those things, helping to build out our CI/CD pipeline, having my fingers in a lot of technical pies, and at the same time, also needing to be, to provide career guidance for the people who reported to me as a manager, and giving them feedback, helping them level up as they were navigating those changes as well and dealing with sort of the individual and personal impacts. And so, yeah, it's very easy. And I remember in one of my reviews talking with my boss about this, where it's just like, there's two sides of this job that I feel like I'm trying to hold down.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those is a very direct impact, and one of those is a very indirect impact. And when push comes to shove, it's really hard to hold both of those.
Right. Yeah. And I'm curious, this is a great time. We'd love to hear from folks that are watching. What would make you want to work for a manager again? Because obviously they are juggling, these, how do I help you with your career? How are you as an individual, building up your skills, getting promoted or able to take on more interesting work? But then also there's like this environmental piece, right? What are the change initiatives going on? What are the projects that are happening, and how are they helping you to thrive in that particular environment? So like, what are the things that stand out when you look over your career about the managers you've worked for that you said, ooh, these are the people I would work for again? What made them different? Like, what sets them apart?
Yeah, what were they doing that made you have that sense about it? You're like, yeah,
Mhm.
that I really want to go work with them again. So we work with a lot of managers who are in these roles, right? Who are struggling to be effective in the jobs that they're in, and also to make their people want to work with them now and in the future, right?
Now and tomorrow and the day after that.
Exactly, which is a lot of it. So we hear these struggles a lot. We've seen these a bunch, and there are two different approaches that we want to talk a little bit about here. That they're different in that they attack different parts of this problem, but they're connected in the sense that they're you can do both of them at the same time. You don't have to choose between them. In fact, we recommend that. But before we get into that, we're getting a couple of comments here in the chat that we want to point at. So Drew says, something that made me want to make work for this person again is they asked for opinions. They admitted when they're wrong. They promoted from within.
Yeah.
And they actually engaged. I'm hearing in there, and I've had that experience too. They actually engaged you and your expertise,
Mhm.
even though they were your manager. And in some organizations, being a manager means you know better. No, no, it doesn't.
You become smarter when you get the manager title. That's what I like to believe, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and that ability to admit when they were wrong,
Mm-hmm.
that builds so much trust. That means that you're willing to be more vulnerable and reflective. And I think that is a key thing that employees respond to. And I know when I've had managers that whether it was, a week later or months later, when they said, you know what, as I look back on things that I've done, I would do it differently. I wasn't wrong. I wasn't right at the time. I thought
Mm-hmm.
that I was, but I didn't consider this, or I really undervalued that. And it's, I think, very humanizing to have that kind of conversation, and be able to see, okay, what are the things that they are responding to, and what are the things that they do consider, and how are they growing as a leader as well.
Mm-hmm. Edgar Schein talks about what he calls level 2 leadership, but he talks about personalization, which is where you're actually engaging with the other person as an individual, as a human being,
Mm-hmm.
where you're actually, as a unique individual, and that creates a level of relationship that does make you want to work with those people again.
Right.
Right, that when you're not treated just like a cog in a machine, right, as a
Mhm.
unit of work, sort of thing, that helps. We've got another comment here about how they deliver feedback, both positive and negative.
Oh,
Absolutely.
yes. Yes. Well, and because again, like one of my old coworkers said, like, Allison, am really bad at responding to good news. Because I would have a manager be like, oh, hey, like you got promoted. Here's like what your new title is. Here's what your new salary is, and blah, blah, blah. And I just kind of go, okay, yeah, I'm letting it sink in. But it was actually missing that like positive feedback of like, you earned this because of here's the things that you did. Like, here's what we see in you. And so for me, like that positive feedback, I don't I don't get it as much as I probably should. I don't, or I don't hear it. Like it doesn't sink in for me. It doesn't click that that's what you're trying to tell me. And it's something that employees do need on a regular basis. We need to know, where do we stand? Like, what are the things that I'm doing that are right? What are the things that I'm doing that are making a positive difference, and like keep me fueled to keep going with that, or for me to stretch into other spaces. And then certainly that like more constructive stuff of like, here's what you're doing that might be getting in your own way, or things that are not working out and getting the results that we need. So for people to be able to understand, where they stand, what kind of an impact they're having, and give them that information, so that they can then decide, right? Exactly, like what I did, what are you seeing me doing? Like what are other people observing me doing, that I might not even realize that's how I'm coming across. And then yes, tell me about the impact that it did or did not have.
Mm-hmm. And to point at a thing that you mentioned there, Allison, is like recognizing as a manager, I've got a bunch of different people who work for me, and each of them hears feedback in a different way, and I
Mhm.
need to customize my approach so that, if I have one approach to giving feedback that I apply to all the people who work for me, that's going to land probably not well with all of them, right?
Right.
I'm optimizing for me, right? Whereas that customization, that personalizing, right, and being able to say, when I talk with Allison about this, here is what I need to do. And so part of what this is getting to, one of the approaches that we talk about, and that we really, in terms of integrating the work that you do as a technical manager, it's very easy to fall into this trap of thinking that I can either focus on, the relationship that I have with my direct report,
Mhm.
or I can focus on the work that needs to get done.
Yeah.
And we may swing from one end of that extreme to the other. Like, oh, and people do things like, well, I noticed that nobody said what would make them want to work for a manager again is that they brought cupcakes. Right? I mean, bringing cupcakes is great, right? Attending and bringing exactly the flavor of cupcakes that
Oh
you
yeah,
want, right?
you got to
Exactly.
get that right.
Right. But here's the thing, that's a largely replaceable sort of skill. But also, it's not actually related to the work that you need to do together. Learning how to give somebody feedback in a way that they can hear so that they know this is the impact that I had, that is directly related to the work that you're actually trying to do together. And so
Mhm.
one of the ways that we talk about integrating the where we can feel like we have multiple different jobs as a technical manager is feeling like the relationship is somehow separate from the work. And what we really try to do is integrate that. How do you talk about how you do the work in a way that builds the relationship? And then how do you leverage the relationship to help you get work done? It's
Mhm.
not either or, it's both and.
Yeah. And you're right, because when we try to separate them out and we think, okay, I spend time up front building that relationship. How was your weekend? You know, what did you have for lunch today? Where did you go to school? Like, we're looking for areas of commonality, and they probably don't directly apply to the work, right? And that's where it feels like this like hard shift to then go from like the social small talk stuff into the work itself. And then we become like very laser focused when we're in the work. So we came up with some opening questions that you can use that are closer to integrating the work and the relationship together. So any one of these could be the first thing that you use to start the conversation, or it could be something that you bring up a little bit later. But again, it's helping you to bring the relationship and the work closer together so that you're able to really build the relationship through the work and then use that relationship to further the work.
Mm-hmm. And see, these are a bunch of things you might ask about. For example, we often in our Managing Amazing People class will ask, like, as a person's manager, what are things that are useful for you to know about them, right?
Mhm.
So if I'm Allison's manager, if I may ask her, like, what have you worked on that you've loved doing? Because now I'm engaging with the human that's on the other side of there, because
Mhm.
machines don't love things, um, right?
Please don't get the point where they are able to do that. Yeah.
Right. And it's, and so now this is tapping into the energy that she has. She gets to talk about, like, you get to talk about, this is actually what's important to me, like what I've loved, what I really, what gets me going. I learn about that, because now that's useful because it informs future work we're going to do together.
Mhm.
Or, when Allison is, when we're working on something and Allison's frustrated by a thing, I go, oh, right, that's because this is a thing she hates doing. And so can address that and be like, hey, Allison, I know that this is not your favorite thing and it needs to get done. And right now, I think you're the one who needs to do it.
Mhm.
And now I'm leveraging the relationship to help get the work done. I'm not just saying, well, just do it. Suck it up.
Suck it up, buttercup. It's
Exactly.
work for a reason.
Because, and there are going to be those moments when both of you don't love what's happening.
Mhm.
But you have enough of a relationship that's grounded through the work that you're doing together
Mhm.
that you can leverage it. I had the opportunity a number of years ago to work with an architect at a company that I was part of. He was, employee number 2 in the engineering side of things. And architects in many organizations kind of get a bad rap for being, off in the ivory tower and not really, understanding how the code really works. And they come up with these designs for other people to implement.
Mhm.
And that was the opposite experience that I had of this guy. Because even though he was remote at a time when almost all of the company was co-located, uh, almost everybody in engineering knew who he was and loved him. And what he did was he was very actively involved in the work, right? He would pair with people, even though he was remote. He would rotate through teams that he would work with so that he had an opportunity to do the work with them. He would, come to the office
Mhm.
a couple of times a year. But he was very much about, and he would listen to concerns that people had. He built this really strong relationship with a very large number of people, not by talking about hobbies or interests, because he was actually a very private, sort of quiet guy, but by talking about the work and working with people in a way that was meaningful, built this really powerful relationship that he could leverage because he had a lot of trust with a ton of people in the organization.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, right? Because he's there pairing with someone, he's able to see and hear and ask questions about how they're reacting to the work, what they're noticing about the work, what they're enjoying, what they're not enjoying, and be able to ideally do something with that information, either right there as the pair partner, or maybe later on, in more of his architect role, working with other groups, with other leaders. And I think as managers, we know our technical managers are probably not sitting down and pairing in the work itself with people on their team. But if you can get close enough to understanding how they're seeing the work, like what are the things that are in front of them daily that are slowing them down? They might not even think about the slowdown anymore. It's so normal, it's so commonplace to them. But as they walk you through their process, you might start to hear things and go, that sounds really strange. Like the code is taking so long to compile that like that's when you go downstairs to get yourself coffee, and you like talk to some people. Then like by the time you make it back to your desk, it's halfway through. Like maybe there's something going on with the compiling process that we really need to take a look at, or like running the tests or deploying the code, right? What are the areas that you are becoming aware of because you're finding out what your people are experiencing in the work, that you can go investigate further and find some improvements around?
Exactly. So, as we talked about, one of the ways that we sort of feel this disorganization, this lack of integration in the role, is by sort of treating the relationships that you have with your direct reports and your boss and your peers,
Mhm.
as separate from the work that you need to do together. And so, integrating those is one approach that we recommend. The other one is a thing we kind of call the 6 manager boxes, which is actually about understanding the complexity of your role as a technical manager. So this is a model originally, we borrowed this from Jade Rubik, who is VP of engineering at New Relic and Gremlin. And he was actually using this model as a way to explain like what's the difference between like a tech lead or an engineering manager or something
Mhm.
like that in your organization, because different organizations sort of allocate these responsibilities differently. But we find that this is a really good way of thinking about your role as a technical manager, which is that pretty much every technical manager we've encountered uh, is involved in more than one of these boxes, right, in their
Mhm.
organization. If you're a people manager, you have responsibility for people, right? You live in that people box. You have things that you need to do there. But depending on how your organization is set up, you may have responsibilities in these other boxes. Um, and more importantly, these are things that all need to get addressed in order for teams and organizations work to be successful. If no one's paying attention to customers, if no one's paying attention to technology, if no one's paying attention to process, then you're likely to have trouble. So the thing is that as a technical manager, one, you need to be aware of where do you have responsibilities, but
Mhm.
also two, where are there interdependencies that you may or may not be thinking about?
And that's the tricky part, right? Because often organizations will describe there's the technology track for promotion and there's the people track for promotion. And when you move into people management, you don't get to just live only in that square. You still are involved in technical decisions, technical guidelines, technical implementations. Obviously, you're getting sucked into like projects. What are the budgets? What are the deadlines? What are the dependencies? What are the different partners? What's the process stuff happening? What's the customer stuff happening? What's the product stuff happening? And this is precisely why you feel like you're juggling suddenly 6 different jobs.
Mhm.
And for us, it's not about how do I take on every single job in these spaces, but truly understanding and really clarifying with your peers, with your boss, and then also with your directs. What is your involvement across these 6 boxes? Like, what parts of these play into your ability to be successful? And then recognizing where do I need to interact with folks that perhaps have the decision rights in these other areas, or that they are actively involved in supporting it or furthering this somehow. And recognizing like what's that network that I plug into, like who are those people, and like what's our combined success, like what's our goal that we're working towards, and figuring out how does this fit into the one job that I have, not the one of many, many, many jobs that I have.
And recognizing where the network is within you, right? Where it's like the way that I show up in trying to address these technology challenges shouldn't actually be different than the way that I show up in dealing with my people management responsibilities. I mean, going back to the idea of knowing how to give feedback, both positive and negative, or reinforcing or corrective, as I like to say. Like that's a skill that's useful regardless of whether or not you're the person's manager. Like when you're actually talking with the architect who's come to present this thing to your team, to the folks that you work with, and it doesn't land at all, and you get you get a lot of upset directed at you later. Like you may need to go deliver some feedback to that architect, even though they don't work with you. Well, those may be skills that you feel like you developed or you honed inside that people box, but they need to be showing up inside your technology responsibilities. And so this is another way of thinking about integrating. It's not just that humans live only in the people box. There are humans in all of these boxes. I worked with a manager once where he was a people manager for the software engineers on this team that he worked with, but he was also responsible for the delivery of that team. So he had process responsibility for that. He had project responsibility for that team. He wasn't the product manager. He had some technology involvement, but there were really these kind of three boxes. But he wasn't the manager for the product manager or for the UX designer, or for the QA engineer that was on the team. And he had one-on-ones to meet regularly with all the people who reported to him. And he started to realize he was building relationships with those folks and coming to understand, asking questions like the ones that we just showed you. And he realized it would be really useful for him to meet one-on-one with everybody who was on the team, because he needed to support them in slightly different but related ways. He wasn't helping them with their career feedback. He wasn't going to be doing their performance evaluation. Like he didn't have people management responsibilities, but the same way that he was leveraging, doing the work in a way that built the relationship, and doing and using the relationship to leveraging that to get the work done, he was able to do that in all of these boxes that he touched in. And so that's the other way that we really like to help try to people feel like I've got one job. It shows up in a couple of different ways, and there may be some slightly different responsibilities, but if I can approach my role in an extremely similar way, then it doesn't feel like I'm juggling all these hats where I need to be super touchy-feely over here, and now I need to be really giving hard-nosed feedback about the performance qualities of this particular architectural choice over here. They're not actually, if we treat them separate, and if we think all of these things are separate responsibilities, then it is going to feel like we're trying to juggle all these hats. But if we can approach them in a coherent way, that really helps us to not have that feeling.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So then when you're not having to juggle and you're not feeling like you're switching modes, that you can stay present. You can actually be yourself, and focus on, the work and the working relationships throughout the day, without feeling like, oh, over here, I need to still build up that rapport with someone before I can give them the hard feedback that I need to tell them. Like, how long until I can tell them the thing that is really driving me bonkers that they do? It's sometimes kind of weird to think about, like, how do you start off with that when you notice it like pretty quickly that it's going to be hard for us to work together, because we have very different styles. But the longer you delay that, the harder it's going to be for you to broach that subject, and for the other person and you to adapt to what your new approach needs to be.
So fundamentally, these are two different ways of thinking about the complex jobs that technical managers have. And what both of them kind of have in common is this idea of, like, we really need to see the human through the lens of the work, and the lens of the human. Like to be able to hold both of those at the same time is a way of making a sense of this complexity. And that's one of the fundamental things that we use in our Managing Amazing People class, which we've talked about on some of these LinkedIn Lives before. And we actually have another public offering coming up at the end of October here. If you're watching this in 2024, you can go to helpingimprove.com/map to find out more. But this is sort of the core idea. Everything that we do in that class is then around giving people tools to actually embody that. How do we actually approach the work in a human way and approach the humans in a work-oriented way so that it doesn't feel so incoherent, so that you aren't feeling the whiplash back and forth?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, and I think right now, Paul, it's still early enough for that October class that we have our super early bird pricing going for another week or so, if I remember correctly. So definitely check out helpingimprove.com/map if you'd like to further your management skills and become more effective in those one-on-one conversations that you have with people. Thanks so much for joining, everyone. This was fantastic, getting some comments, hearing more about what makes managers so great that you would want to work with them again.
And if you want to be a manager that people work with again, maybe work on some of this stuff. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.